Hi, welcome to EconVersations. My name is Scott Beaulier. I'm the director of the Manuel Johnson Center for Political Economy, and I'm really excited to be here talking to you all today. This is the very first episode of EconVersations, and we hope to have a series of episodes talking about the Johnson Center, how it relates to society, and also conditions in Alabama. Tonight it's just going to be me here talking and explaining the Manuel Johnson Center to you a little bit, and also explaining the concept of the show. In future episodes, we hope to bring on distinguished professors, distinguished members of the community, as well as business leaders to have a conversation about economics, about things that relate to everyday Alabamians, as well as people in the national economy. Tonight, again, it's just me talking about the mission of the Johnson Center, why we're doing this show, and giving you an idea of what's to come in future episodes. The Manuel H. Johnson Center for Political Economy was founded about a year ago. It was established through 3 generous gifts from the BB&T Foundation. BB&T is a large bank in the Southeast. The Charles G. Koch Foundation, which the Koch Industries is one of the largest private companies in the U.S., and then Manuel H. Johnson, who's an alum of Troy. He was an economics major who graduated a number of years ago and went on to be a Federal Reserve Board member. The 3 individuals I mentioned came together and each contributed $1.2 million to establish a center with $3.6 million of total funding. That center is committed to the study and teaching of economic freedom, free enterprise, and how free markets and capitalism interact with society to produce good and sometimes not so good results. So the money has allowed me as director to hire 3 other economists. These economists will be on the show in the future. Their names are Dr. George Crowley, Dr. Daniel Smith, and Dr. Dan Sutter. Each of them are distinguished economists who are very productive researchers, but also able to talk about the economy in a way that makes sense to ordinary individuals. So you can look forward to them in future episodes and look for their research as it's going to be coming out in the months ahead. The Johnson Center's mission, again, is to promote the study and exploration of free enterprise. And I want to talk to you all tonight for most of my time about what that means, what exactly it is that we're doing, and what are the big ideas that we're trying to explore within our center. So what we're focused on more than anything is the study of capitalism. And capitalism means many things to many different people, but to us we have a very clear definition of what capitalism means. It means whether or not people are free. Are they free to move? Are they free to work where they want to? Are they free from excessive taxation and regulation? In sum, capitalism to economists means economic freedom. And if you look at the slide that I've put up and brought to you tonight, that slide it really spells out the 5 dimensions of economic freedom and capitalism. And let's go through these one at a time. Economic freedom means that your government is fairly limited in its scale and scope. How much is your government spending? How much are people being taxed? And what kind of enterprises are being supported by government as well? Economic freedom means that you respect private property. There's a rule of law that's present in your society. The laws are predictable and they're fair to each individual. Nobody is above the law. That's what the rule of law means. Some societies actually have a strong respect for the legal code. Some don't. The 3rd dimension of economic freedom is monetary policy and how it relates to individuals. Is your central bank printing a lot of money? Is it unpredictable what your central bank is going to do next? Does your central bank tend to print money that just pays off the debt of your nation? If it does, that's probably not consistent with economic freedom. You're probably living in a society with high inflation and a lot of uncertainty. Societies that constrain their central banks tend to perform better. So we're going to look at that and talk about how it relates to capitalism. The 4th dimension is freedom to trade internationally. How easy is it for goods to come in, for goods to go out? Are there large tariffs that are being placed on your goods and services? Do you have quotas on the goods that are coming into your country? Do you limit the number of cars that can come in? Does your country subsidize certain forms of production like automobiles, oil, sugar? Or is it wide open, where comparative advantage can be pursued and countries are producing what they're actually best at producing? The fifth and final dimension of economic freedom is regulation. How much business regulation is there in your country? Are your people free to work where they want to work, at wages that they want to work at? Or are there regulations on the number of hours they can work, the wages that they can work for? What kind of business impediments does a business face? How long does it take to start a business in your country? Is it quick? Does it take months, maybe even years? If it's the latter, you're not economically free. You're not a capitalist country. Capitalist countries do well on all 5 of these dimensions. So again, the Johnson Center is interested in looking at how capitalistic the United States is, what threats there are to capitalism, and what the future looks like in relation to economic freedom and prosperity for Americans. As we move ahead and look at some of the slides that I've created for you all tonight, we can see that economic freedom can be measured, okay? And what we do is we engage in relative measurements. We look at economic freedom relative to all countries in the world. So we look at those 5 components and we see how different countries are doing relative to each other. And we can come up with some sense of where free countries are and countries that are unfree. And if you look at this table, these are some of the freest countries in the world: Hong Kong, Singapore, New Zealand, Switzerland, Chile. There's the United States. Now, if you look at the heading on this chart, it says 2007. The data is always going to be a couple of years behind where we actually are. And that's because it takes a long time to collect it. So the United States, despite all of the problems that we are witnessing in everyday politics, the debt ceiling debacle, a lot of contentious argument in Washington, D.C., a lot of uncertainty in the stock market, the United States fares quite well when we look at overall economic freedom. We're still one of the freest places in the world. But there are reasons to be concerned about how the U.S. is doing and how other countries are doing as well. Here's the bigger picture of economic freedom in the world. These are just a selection of countries. Blue countries are the freest countries in the world. Red countries are some of the least free. And as you can see, there's a big spectrum when we look at economic freedom around the world. Some countries are very free, like Germany, Japan. Even France is a pretty free country. And then some countries are anything but capitalistic. They're top-down. There isn't such a thing as private property in some of these places. The monetary authorities are engaging in runaway inflation. It's anything but freedom to their people. Those places are places like Venezuela and Zimbabwe, which come in near the bottom of economic freedom rankings. And if you all know anything about Venezuela or Zimbabwe, they're places where everything has been nationalized. Instead of allowing private ownership of the means of production, they have government-run producers of heavy industry. The commanding heights are controlled by the top. Zimbabwe has had so much inflation that their currency is worthless. People would rather burn it than use it as a means of exchange. That's what we mean by lack of freedom. Free countries don't have as many problems when we look at how the economy relates to people in them. This is a map of the world. It's a little bit blurry and bright, but you get the general idea here. Blue countries are countries that are very free. Red countries are countries that aren't. And then we have a continuum of in between. Green is mostly free, yellow is a little less free, and then red is the absolute worst. Much of Africa, much of South America is in the red, okay? The blue is heavily concentrated in the Far East and in Western Europe and the United States. Also Canada does very well. So we have places that are very free. We have places that are very unfree. A puzzling question, a perplexing question for economists is how do we make some of these countries that are less free more free? It's my sincere belief that freer countries are better ones. And I'm going to get to a couple of slides in a minute that illustrate that. Freer countries tend to treat their people better. You tend to eat better. You live longer. A lot of good things come from freedom. These places that are unfree cause you to wonder, what could be done? Are there things that we could do to transform them and make them more free. And of course, we're also interested in the US. Are there things the US can be doing to preserve and protect its economic freedom and perhaps to become more free over time? When we look at some of the evidence, this is why freedom matters. This is where the rubber hits the road. When you look at what economic freedom means to people living in these places, the disparities between rich and poor are tremendous. The freest countries in the world tend to take care of their people. Freedom leads to a lot of opportunity. It leads to innovation and entrepreneurship. It gives people strong incentives to work hard, to be productive. And all of that productivity and effort turns into a lot of wealth. Okay? The poorest places in the world aren't doing so well in terms of their economic freedom. If you're in an unfree place, you tend to be focusing on things like, where's my next meal coming from? What's my water like? Is my water safe to drink? Population rates and birth rates are very high in these places, and many of the kids under age 5 end up dying. That's what a lack of freedom means. It's a huge difference between rich and poor, and economic freedom is behind a lot of that. Here's another way of thinking about what economic freedom means. It means seeing your grandchildren. Okay? In the freest countries in the world, people are living to be almost 80 years old. In the poorest countries in the world, they haven't even reached 60 years of age yet. That's a vast difference. It's a generational difference. It really is a difference of seeing your grandchildren. So people in freer countries enjoy greater wealth. They enjoy greater medical care. Okay? There are more MRI machines in Cleveland, Ohio, than in some of the developing countries of the world. That has a lot to do with the incentives that we face in free countries relative to unfree countries. A couple more slides, and then we'll wrap this up. If you look at economic freedom in the environment, something that people often claim is that free countries don't take care of the environment. There's just a lot of pollution, smog, and other problems that come with production. Capitalism pollutes. Air quality is bad in capitalistic countries. This just isn't so. Some of the worst polluters are places that are very unfree. When people don't have private property rights in places like Venezuela and Zimbabwe, there's really no legal recourse when someone pollutes. So if someone pollutes on your property and you want to sue, you can't, because the nation owns the property. If someone pollutes on my property here in Troy, Alabama, I can take it up with a judge and probably get a settlement. That discourages pollution. In free countries, as income rises, people tend to value the environment more as well. Valuing the environment is a luxury that poor, unfree countries really don't have. Economic freedom also correlates strongly with civil liberties and political rights. This slide is a bit difficult to understand because a low score is actually a good score. When we try to measure how democratic a country is, how many rights people have when in the political realm, a low score is generally considered better. When you look at this, you see that free countries treat their people better when it comes to the public sphere. People in free countries can vote, whether they're male or female, whether they're Republican, Democrat, or other. People in unfree places get shot or imprisoned if they go to the polls. Women are discouraged from voting, and minorities that are opposed to the ruling party are under severe threat if they dare try to enter the public space. Unfree places don't allow you to express yourself. Flag burning is something that will certainly get you killed in an unfree country. While we may not like it in the United States, it's something that we at least tolerate. So free countries allow for greater political freedom as well as greater economic freedom, okay? And here's the big picture. This is where I want to end my discussion of economic freedom and how it relates to the Johnson Center. If you look at this chart, there are a couple of things that are important. One, the US is still one of the best places to be. That blue line is far above the green line in the chart, which means the United States is way above the rest of the world when it comes to economic freedom. But take a look at what's happening since 2000 in the chart. Since 2000, our economic freedom ranking as a country is on the decline. The United States isn't doing as good a job as it had been in the past over those 5 dimensions. We're regulating people more. Our central bank has gotten out of control in terms of its monetary policy. It's printing a lot of money. It's very unpredictable what Ben Bernanke and the Federal Reserve are going to do next. Government spending has exploded with the financial crisis of 2008. Taxes seem certain to rise as well. So we've gotten worse on almost every dimension of economic freedom here in the United States. And that trend is hard to see reversing in the near future. Deficits remain huge. The average American household ends up paying about $36,000 per year in taxes just to the federal government. Now you may say, I only make $40,000 or $45,000. That can't be right. But it's an average. It's including a lot of wealthy individuals in that total. $36,000 every household in America going just to the federal government. This is 3 times the amount that was going to the federal government in 1965. Our freedoms are under attack, and we face very real threats. The debt debate, which really captured American media attention for much of the summer, was a debate about spending $46 trillion versus $43 trillion over the next 10 years. That difference in spending really isn't all that significant. 46 versus 43. Both numbers are really, really big. What the Manuel H. Johnson Center for Political Economy is about it's about focusing on why is that number so big? Do we really need to be spending 43 trillion or 46 trillion over 10 years? What are the essential things we should be spending money on as a government? And where can we trim? When we look at some of the other indicators of the trajectory America is on, our debt as a fraction of gross domestic product is running very high. Back during World War II, it was okay for us to run 110% of gross domestic product debt ratios. We were financing a war. We were trying to protect the West from a very serious and evil attack. Today, we're back up to about 90% of GDP, debt to GDP ratios. There's no war, really significant war being fought today. It's just to sustain a series of entitlements that have gotten out of control. Neither party seems very committed to the kind of reform that would be necessary to get the U.S. back under control. In fact, Barack Obama has said he promises to halve the deficit by 2016. Having a deficit, which is at unprecedented levels, isn't a really major accomplishment. Deficits historically have been about 2.9% of U.S. income. Today, they're running at about 10% of U.S. income. To have it just brings us back to 5%. That's still a substantial and very large number. So there are very good reasons to be concerned about America's future, to wonder if the thing that we call the American exception can be continued. Can economic freedom be preserved? What is it going to take in the way of research, in the way of policy, in the way of politics to preserve it? That's what our center's about. That's what we're focusing on as a group of academics. That's what we want our students to engage and think about in their classes at Troy, in some of their activities, in the way of service too. EconVersations is about getting that message, getting these ideas out to a larger audience, the lay audience in many cases. We want to engage with those of you who are tuning into this show and have you start to think about what are the essential things the government should be doing? What does it take to promote growth? Why do we see life expectancy so much higher in free countries? And if we can conclude that life expectancy, wealth are pretty good things, how can we go about promoting greater economic freedom in other parts of the world? So it's a big mission, a big challenge that I have as director of the center. We're really trying to transform Troy University, but we're trying to transform the hearts and minds of people in Alabama, around the nation, and ultimately around the world. The challenges are immense, but the opportunity, the benefits of this are huge as well. So in shows to come, you're going to have a number of guests who come on, talking sometimes about foundational, core ideas. Is capitalism moral? Is it right? You're going to have people coming on talking about their research. One of my scholars is one of the leading experts on the economics of natural disasters. How did we respond to the tornadoes that hit us in April this spring? Was it the efficient, appropriate response? Other scholars are going to come on and talk about policies like globalization and sweatshops. Are these things just good through and through, or are there trade-offs that we face? One of my next guests to appear will be in late September. His name is John Allison from BB&T. Mr. Allison was the CEO of BB&T throughout the financial crisis of 2008. His story is a very interesting one, and we'll spend the entire half hour in a conversation, as the title of the show suggests, an EconVersation, a conversation about economics. And we'll go through his experiences at the bank. What was it like being a banker during the financial crisis? Was the Federal Reserve helping or hurting him manage his company? It's a really interesting story that he tells about his experience on the front lines, and it's one I hope you all will think about tuning in to. Future episodes will have academics and members of the community all coming on and talking about economic freedom and how it relates to your everyday lives, as well as the lives of students. So I thank you all for tuning in tonight. I very much look forward to future shows and hope you tune in as well.